So my journey starts in Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, born and raised. My parents are pastors. Grew up in a house of 5 kids. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, 4 boys, 1 girl. We weren't the Jackson 5, we were the Bowens 5. And everything was musical. My dad played multiple instruments. My mom sings, she writes, evangelist, dad's a preacher. And so growing up in, North Philly, back then, you went to church all the time. It was every day of the week. Maybe Saturdays you didn't go to church unless there was some kind of joy night or something, or some kind of dinner, something. But so I experienced being in church a lot, and my father was a pastor who played, so he had to always play and then preach, or sometimes his mic for preaching would be right by the organ. So I remember my dad kind of pulling me aside one day saying, "Son, you're going to have to learn how to play. I need help," basically. Hard to keep musicians consistent back in that time. Churches really didn't pay like that back then. So that wasn't a big thing. And if they could do something, it would be like a love offering. That's how you get that envelope, or you would get the bald hand where somebody would hand you something and you like, I'm gonna open this joint up and it's gonna be 5 ones. It could be that. But anyway, my dad pulled me aside one day and he just was like, "Son, I need you to learn." And when I say my father literally taught me in that one day, started showing me a few things, I was literally probably playing the next week at the church. And my experience of playing has always been jump in the water and swim. One of those type of things. You get thrown in and you swim. And growing up in Kojic, we started off Kojic, you always there's not like a set list. You've never had a set list growing up. So you're gonna learn as something is thrown out at you. The only time you learn anything is a choir rehearsal. So ironically, the first thing I learned to play, I didn't learn to play mains first. I was an aux player from the beginning. My dad taught me to be the second key player, the third key player from the beginning, which meant in our church we had Brother Keena on the organ, my dad was on mains and probably playing key bass, and I was on third keys. So I from the beginning learned the art of aux. I was playing strings, I was playing horn sounds, and you didn't really move too much from that place in that time. So I developed as an auxiliary player first, and I'll never forget the keyboard my dad brought home. When we had a community choir called Hunting Park Community Gospel Choir. We lived in the Hunting Park section of Philadelphia. And so my dad started a community choir, Hunting Park Community Gospel Choir, and that's really where I cut my teeth. I got my roots. I learned everything. And it was mostly me and my brother playing. My dad, I think we were doing a lot of community work, and I'll never forget my dad brought home this Roland XP50. Never forget it. One of the first patches I remember was that piano and bass patch. We had to split. The bass, you would play the bass. I think it was patch 13, I believe. You would play the bass. When you first play it, it's a finger bass. When you would hit on it, it would turn to a slap bass. The piano, it was a piano. When you hit on it, it had a horn patch on it. So that was one of the first patches I remember playing. I remember the West Coast patch. I remember Poly Saws. I remember Poly Rock. I was a big fan of a lot of those different patches. But I literally learned how to play the keyboard from that keyboard. And my dad, at that point, he brought it home and he played it sometimes, but he mostly let me play on it. And it had the floppy disk drive. And so I started learning how to track out on that actual keyboard. So that was my first official keyboard. And, well, Dad, I know Dad, it wasn't mine, it was yours. But, of course, kids, we claim whatever's yours. But that's the keyboard that I really learned to develop on. And one of the first keyboards that I bought for myself, I'll never forget, was like a JV1000. But let me backtrack a little bit. So I started off with my mom and dad, our church, Sanctuary Ministries. And then we had this community choir, Hunting Park Community Gospel Choir. What we would do is whenever the sun was out, we would take the speakers, amplifiers outside, and we would just minister to the community. My dad would preach, which as a kid growing up, you wanted to go outside and play football and do your thing, have fun. Dad wanted us out there. It was always embarrassing with the friends in school who would see us out there singing, witnessing and ministering to everybody while they're out there playing football, having fun. I didn't appreciate it then, but I do now. And there were a lot of other families in that community who appreciated what we were doing because it wasn't something that they necessarily had. So I took it for granted, but I learned everything there. I learned discipline. I learned how to stay in my lane. You know what I mean? Like, if dad was playing this part, there were a lot of times where dad was playing and I was the co-pilot. And I had to learn how to, my dad was good. Remember those, back in the day, we had those PV amps, the heads, and you would plug four channels into that thing and you could control the mix. Well, my dad used to control the mix, and it would be times where if I wasn't really hitting or on it, you could have dad over there fading you down. You like, why am I fading out? Like, it's an automatic fade going on from dad looking at me like you ain't quite ready. That's something that I went through, and the school of hard knocks, learning discipline, learning how to stay in your lane, learning to hear the word no. It's not about you. I learned all of that in choir. I miss good choir music. Choir, that is like, I think choirs back in that day is like literally like school. It was literally school for musicians and singers. It's like the equivalent of a sport. Like if you played basketball, I didn't get to play football, basketball, any of that. Choir was that for me. Choir taught me discipline. You had to be on time. You had to know your work, do your homework. You know what I mean? Or you could get sat down. You would not play, or you didn't get to sing. And so the Hunting Park Community Gospel Choir was where I developed as a musician. I learned to take my craft very seriously. And then I quickly grew to a point to where then I could be trusted to be the main player. Eventually my dad stopped playing, and then he began directing with my mom. And man, that was just some amazing times. One of the most inspirational moments of my life happened with that choir. We were doing a joy night at Rehoboth Temple in 12th and Wyoming. This is this church I was born in. There was a joy night going on, and then there was a special guest artist that came that night named Steve Middleton. And Steve Middleton came. I never heard of him, didn't know who he was. He came with his choir, Unity and Praise, and he had a set of musicians with him. Now, if you know anything about Kojic, you always dressed up. You didn't wear jeans, t-shirts, none of that. We had to wear white. The uniform was always black and white button up, black tie, black pants, black shoes, right? Well, in the back of the church, there was like 4 or 5 musicians. They wearing jean jackets. They looked like, in my mind at that time, I was like, who are these thugs sitting in the church? Like, they sit in the back of the church clowning, laughing. And when they called Steve Middleton up to play, he got up there, and then his musicians got up there. And I never forget it. The keyboard player had an O1W, a Korg O1W. My keyboard, now mind you, back at the time I was playing, this before my dad was letting me use the XP. I had like one of those heavy Yamaha keyboards that you put batteries in, that had the big speakers on it, like a PS something. I remember them taking my keyboard off the stand and putting that O1W up. And I was just mortified. I was sitting there always like, who do they think they are? Moving, I'm like 11, 12 years old at the time. The keyboard player happened to be Ty Tribbett. He's playing for this group. Him, Dana Saray. Dana it was 2 of them. So Ty, one of them played my dad's XP50. One of them played the O1W. Scott Stevens was on the organ. Thaddeus Tribbett, back then we called him Terry, was on bass. On drums was Brian Fraser Moore. I never heard nothing like that in my life. When they went, the moment, I was mad at them because they took my keyboard off the stand, but the moment they started to play, my whole attention shifted. And it was like a vision. I was like, yo, I had never heard a sound like that. Back then, you taped everything through a tape recorder. And nobody ever recorded in those days music good, because you would have the mic all in the system and you could hear the musicians in the back, but they never mic'd the musicians. So I remember getting that tape and learning everything that those dudes did. When Steve Middleton released the album officially, which was produced by Hezekiah Walker, I learned every song on that record. I said to myself, I'm going to play with that dude one day. I wanted to play with Ty from the first time I saw him. And it literally motivated me to chase and practice and become better at my craft. If I heard they were going to be playing somewhere, I was there. That was a moment in my life where I found a hero. Now, my father was my hero. My dad established me. He gave me the kickstart. But when Ty came on the scene, it was the motivation that really launched me forward. And so that was like 92, 93 when I saw him, right? You fast forward a couple years later, and Ty starts a group called GA. And I'll never forget, my boy Vernon Prelo came and was like, yo, Ty got a choir, yo, you should come. Now, at that time, I'm like 15, 16. I ain't driving nowhere. Ty lived in Jersey, I lived in Philly. My parents was not letting me go over no bridge. They started this group, and I'll never forget, I saw them at Ford Memorial. And I was like, I didn't know that what he did on keys for Steve Middleton, he could do that as a choir director. Like, it was like go from being a musician to being a choir director. I didn't see the connection, and I didn't know that it was gonna be dope. Like, Ty's a choir director? You mean he not playing no more? And when I'll never forget when we saw him at Ford Memorial, I'd never seen anything like it before. And I was like, yo, I gotta play with this group, right? I gotta be a part of this group. And Ty didn't know who I was from a can of paint or nothing. And at that time, I connected with a gospel artist named John Payton. John Payton took me under his wing. He taught me jazz. He taught me different styles of music, taught me writing, arranging, all of that. And I happened to be playing with him 2 years later, in 98, at a Joy Night. Back then, we called them Joy Nights, right? I happened to be playing with him and did not know that Ty was on the bill. We were opening for Ty. So when I'm playing at this point with John Payton, I'm directing the band. I'm the youngest guy in the band, giving out signals and directions to the guys. And I just see Ty stand up and walk across the church. And he's like this. And then I watch the rest of GA look at me while I'm playing. And I'm like, first of all, I'm freaking out because, oh my God, he's here and I didn't know he was going, you know what I mean? Like, for your hero to be looking at you and now paying attention to you. And that moment like changed the trajectory of my life, like literally. Not long after that, I stopped playing with John Payton and started playing with Ty, and everything took off from there. In terms of what I was exposed to, like what I knew before musically was my church, my family, the people who I grew up with. And I never really was exposed to a bigger scheme of things in terms of music industry and stuff like that. But when I connected with Ty, immediately I started traveling outside of the state, which is something I never really did. And I immediately started meeting all my heroes, Melvin Crisples, John Peters, Stephen Ford, James Porges, all of those guys. I started seeing these guys, but what was weird was they actually were beginning to see me. And so I started, GA was really doing what we were doing at the time. That whole Philly neo soul movement was happening. The Jill Scott's music, Soul Child's, Floetry, all of them. So we were a part of a lot of that. Like, we would be in the same studios that those guys was in. Larry Gold's studio, was down the hall. We would be working at a James Porter studio. You can see you will always see Questlove, Black Thought, Hub, all of those different guys. And that was like literally a time for me. That was like school, like that time. Being around those studios taught me everything that, like with Ty Tribbett, I was his main key player. Dana was his MD, but when it came to mains, playing the main role of the pianos, the roots, all those types of things, I was his main keyboard player, but I was also an aux player as well. Because I was not just playing piano, I had to learn how to play 2 and 3 keyboards to fill the music up and to add elements. He always wanted you to stretch and to be more creative. And that was man, you gotta think the pressure of playing with Ty, number one, because he is a keyboard player. You gotta think he had high expectations. So I don't think I was at the level that they were, that one. I never felt that way. But I think Ty saw something in me, and both him and Dana really invested and groomed me and helped me become the musician I am. And even I can't tell you how many people I met along the way working with GA. I traveled and toured with them for 10 years, from 98 to 2008. And, met my wife. She was one of the altos. I was telling John about about how me and my wife met and how we connected. And we both met on the scene, doing music. And She was singing background. I was playing, and that kind of became a thing. And later on, we built a family. Me and my wife, 15 years married now, 2 kids, 8 and 11. And just came with, listen, it's been a major journey. But it all started with my father. It was a necessity. There was something that was needed. And because of what my father needed, and he started me off in the aux role, I learned to pay attention to details differently as a musician because of where I started. I didn't start off learning, I didn't even know what the scales were. I didn't know what C was. I didn't know none of that stuff. My dad started me off on triads. Like, learn these specific triads, you can get through any song with these triads. And that's how I learned. And for the most part, I had to follow his coattail. So I learned the art of also following the leader, the art of also listening to whoever is the main guy and complimenting. And so as we discussed the topic of aux playing, one of the main things I developed and learned was learning how to follow whoever the main person is, listening to the music, listening to the big picture, and not making it about myself. You know what I mean? So this has been an interesting journey. I've got to work with and tour with, man, in my 20 years experience professionally. I don't usually count, from the time when I was 11, but from when I started working with Ty, been about 20 years. I worked with everybody from Music Soul Child, Floetry, Vivian Green, Israel Houghton, Anthony Hamilton, Lauryn Hill, Timbaland, Brandy, Janet Jackson, Nicole Scherzinger, The Roots on Jimmy Fallon, Kiara Sheard, Marvin Sapp, Jonathan Nelson, Jason Nelson, Judy Jacobs, Aaron Lindsay, Matt Haynes, Andre Crouch. I can't even, I will get in trouble if I try to keep going. BJ Putnam, we was talking about him earlier. Just countless artists. Karen Clark, Kiara Sheard, which I can't wait for her new record to come out. It's gonna be crazy. But God's allowed me to be able to work with a lot of different people. And this is something that was super important. As a musician, in gospel, we got some major keyboard heroes, like production heroes. And I always wanted to learn a certain sound. And I just, for some reason, my skill set, and I think it may have to do with the fact that I learned how to play aux first and not necessarily mains first. So when it came time to try to learn a certain skill set, I would struggle. And I promise you, I would be practicing 6-7 hours and be beating myself I can't figure it out. And then of course when Ty broke out on the scene and Life came out and then Victory Live, I noticed I was always hard on my gift. I didn't like myself because I thought I didn't sound like who I wanted to sound like. But when I left Ty in 2008, and me and my family, we just kind of moved to Baltimore for our family. We wanted to start building the family, have kids, the whole nine. I started getting called to do jobs because I didn't sound like the people I wanted to sound like. Because I sounded different. I had something else. I end up, in my journey of developing my skill, I end up developing an alternate sound. And I didn't know the value of having your own sound. And it was something that just happened. Other people appreciated it. I didn't know what it was until after I left Ty. And then when I left Ty, they're like, dude, you want to come play aux on this album? Or come play on this record? Or come play this record? And I noticed I was getting calls consistently because I offered something different than what was already out there. And so never look down on your sound. The Bible says, despise not the days of small beginnings. Sometimes God is developing something in you that's not somewhere else. And it's not a bad thing. It doesn't make them bad or you bad. It's literally, he's given a smorgasbord. And sometimes people want red versus blue, or somebody wants yellow, you know what I'm saying? And so when I realized that, I was like, wow, it helped me start building my confidence, because then I'm like, wow, I have my own identity. And it became something amazing. And I mean, I've gone on to work with so many different people because I offer something different. And don't be afraid to offer something different. Don't be afraid to have a different approach. Because I didn't learn traditionally, I don't function traditionally musically, but that's also why I've been able to build a catalog with the type of people I have. And I have a lot of repeat customers I work with. clients that I work with, because, dude, you have a unique approach to how you do auxiliaries.